do?
Howdy do.
Well, howdy do to you too. So I thought I would tell you some Wiley Oakley stories about Wiley and his wife Rebecca. Well, Wiley and Rebecca, they did some courting at the corn shuckings, and they did some sparking, and they decided to get married. And Wiley, he got that legal piece of paper from the courthouse and went to see Rebecca one night at her cabin, the Bud Ogle cabin outside Gatlinburg. And they were there, and they decided to go for a walk. It was a winter's evening, but it was nice outside. The moon was glowing real bright. The stars were shining up in the sky, and they were walking along, just so excited about getting married. And Wiley said, Rebecca, let's get married tonight. I know a preacher man. Let's go. And she agreed. So they walked about an hour to get to that preacher man's cabin. Well, by the time they got there, the cabin was dark. There was no candles or lanterns glowing at all, and just a little bit of smoke coming out the chimney. So they'd gone to bed, but that didn't stop Wiley. So he went up and knock, knock, knock. Knock, knock, knock. Finally somebody said, "Who's that a-knocking on my door?" "Well, it's a Wiley Oakley. I'm here with Rebecca Ann, and we wants to get married." "Married? Wiley Oakley, don't you know we done undressed and we in bed now? Come back another time." Well, I said, "No, we're here now, and we really wants to get married. Could you help us out, please, preacher man?" "Well, all right, Wiley. Have you got that legal piece of paper?" "Oh, yes, got it in my back pocket." "You got a dollar bill?" "Oh, yes, it's in my wallet." "And the gal's here with you?" "Oh, yes, I'm holding her hand right now." Said, "Okay, I tell you what. You put those things under the door, give me the legal piece of paper and that money, and you stand on the outside of the door, and I'll stand on the inside of the door, because I ain't going to get dressed for you, and I'll perform the ceremony just like that." So the invisible preacher tied the knot between Wiley and Rebecca that evening. Later on, somebody asked Wiley, "Wiley, do you think that marriage is legal? I mean, did you have an actual witness, because you didn't see the preacher didn't see you?" And Wiley thought about it. He said, "Oh, well, yes, I do remember seeing the preacher's wife. Her head was peeping around the window. Yep. And there was an old owl perched up in the tree going, hooty-hoo." Now, I'm wondering if that owl was actually yodeling, which is what Wiley did when it was a tall tale, and you could believe it or not, because I think that's that kind of a story, a fanciful story. But it's called The Invisible Preacher, and it's a book by Edna Lynn Sims. Next story I want to tell you is a different version of how Wiley and Rebecca got married. And it's from facts that I have gathered together and some of the customs in the Smokies. It's not written down anywhere, but this is the way that I sort of imagined it to be. So here's a painting of the picture that I imagine. Well, it was 116 years ago in the Smoky Mountains in the wintertime, and it was Friday, January the 9th, 1906. And it was probably snow on the ground outside the cabin, and it was cold out there. And the cabin was the Noah Bud Ogle cabin, which is a fine example of a pioneer cabin outside of Gatlinburg. Beautiful cabin. Well, inside this cabin, which is where Rebecca grew up, this is where her family lived, inside the cabin was nice and warm because that stone fireplace had a big blazing fire in it. And when it was time for the minister of the gospel, Reverend Kerr, K-E-A-R, to perform the ceremony, he stood with his back to the fireplace, but he didn't stand there long because that fire was hot on his britches, so he moved over to the side. And then Wiley and Rebecca, they probably stood on the other side facing it. And the flickering flames from that fire, they just lit the whole scene. And a nice romantic-looking setting. Now, the ceremony was very basic, very plain, nothing fancy at all. There was no music. There was no, flower girl, no bridesmaid. There was no bouquet of flowers. There was no wedding ring. The family says that probably came later. Wiley took a silver dime and he hollowed it out, and that became their wedding ring later on. And that wedding ring is still in the family. So the only thing I will add and suggest is that maybe Rebecca, she was born on Christmas Day, by the way, maybe she had a sprig of green holly and red berries put in her blonde hair to make her a little bit prettier than she already was. So the minister performed the ceremony, and they were united as husband and wife till death do them part. Well, after the wedding, there was a feast, and then they probably stayed in something called a wiener cabin. That doesn't mean a hot dog stand, but this is the place where the family weaned the young couple off from the main family. And they stayed there, and then at some point, it was winter, so whenever the weather was good enough, a break in that winter weather, they departed to go on their honeymoon to a place called Scratch Britches Mountain. Scratch Britches Mountain. Now, that was at the foot of Mount LeConte, and this cabin was the furthest cabin that there was, and it was 8 miles from Gatlinburg, and the nearest neighbor was 2 miles away, so it was very isolated. So whenever it was, Wiley and Rebecca, they hit the trail to go to that place. Well, as they were going through the woods, it was a tough walk because it was not a well-used trail. There were rhododendron thickets, there was creeks to cross, there were logs to get over. And all that time, Wiley and Rebecca were at the very beginning of their adventure of life together. So this was long before Wiley became known as the Roman man of the mountains. This was before Wiley became a nature guide, became called the '1 guide in the Smokies by the park. This was before Wiley helped some of the founders of the park to lay out the boundaries of the park. It's before he blazed some of the trails, before he named some of the wildflowers. This was before Wiley sometimes was called the Will Rogers of the South. This was before Wiley started his hiking business, and before Wiley and Rebecca started the Wiley shop, which had a sign that some people said, "Antiques made to order." And this was before Wiley had gone on tour to the New York World's Fair, traveling with a band and promoting the Smoky Mountains. This is before Wiley did so many things. And this is before they had 12 children, 10 of which to have long, fruitful lives. And there's one of them still living. And come July, he'll be 90 years old, and his name is Wiley Casey Oakley. So this was a long time before any of that happened, before they moved into Scratch Britches Mountain, before they ran into the rattlesnakes, before the floods, before the wildflowers, before all of that, at the very beginning of their life together. Well, they finally got there, and Wiley said that this is where their honeymoon was. And he was on honeymoon with the golden-haired bride of Scratch Britches Mountain, is what he called her. Well, now, Wiley's father, Henry Coleman Oakley, had given Wiley a few tools to take with him, and he'd given him some honey because he had some bee gums, and so Wiley had all of that. He also trained Wiley in how to find wild bee honey in the woods. So Wiley says of that time, "Well, we was on our honeymoon, you know, and we had honey and more honey." Well, when they finally reached that cabin, when they got there, they found out that there was absolutely nothing in that cabin. It was just not a stick of furniture in it. Before Wiley had gotten married, he wrote, "I've got 3 things. I've got a gun, I've got a dog, and I got a lantern. And I figured that if I had a wife, I'd have everything I'd ever need. But after he got married, he changed his tune, and later he wrote, well, when I went on my honeymoon, I found out that I had everything that I needed but a wife. But he had a wife, and he had a cabin that was empty, so he did something about it. He was a man of ingenuity, a jack of all trades, and he used his tools, and he made what they needed. A bed, of course. Had slats on it, and they had a corn-shuck mattress to sleep on. And also, he probably made a dresser, still in the family. Probably made some shelves, bowls, spoons, whatever. And then in the local woods, there's lots of wild game, bears and squirrels and other things that they could kill to have something to eat, to get settled down, to get established on their honeymoon at Scratch Britches Mountain. There's lots of good stories about Wiley. You can find them in his book if anybody wants it. A real good price today. And I also have some free books if anybody wants one of these. So see me after. So if you have any questions, thank you for attending. I hope you enjoyed yourself.